6 reasons why you might want to do a high carb, low fat, mass gaining phase when you're bulking. Here it is. So number 1 is insulin. Now, you're probably thinking fat storage hormone, right? That's what you probably get if you search on YouTube. However, a lot of people forget that it's also a very anabolic hormone. So, although the impact of it might not be that significant over, let's say, a post-workout or even a daily basis, over months of having high insulin levels, it will probably make quite a moderate impact on muscle growth. So, leading to more muscle growth, obviously, assuming protein and calories are obviously in a surplus, or you can't be surplus of protein, but you meet protein requirements and all that is good, insulin will play a big part. And now, one thing I have to mention is insulin also interacts with human growth hormone, which if you think in steroid bodybuilders, they take human growth hormone and insulin. So more on insulin sensitivity and fat storage before getting on number 2, or point number 2, is that out of the 3 macronutrients, when you consume carbohydrates, it will have the biggest and largest acute response to insulin, which again is an anabolic hormone. And it also interacts with a lot of other sex hormones, which is obviously important. So all insulin really does is take stuff from the blood and puts it into other cells. Whereas fat, although it can be used for fuel obviously, however, as we know biologically, the body does prefer glucose as the preferred fuel source. Anyway, besides that, fat goes into fat, direct conversion. Now, think of an analogy of cargo pants, and I got this from BRODERICK, CHAVEZ, and he got it from another guy. Now, if you think about glucose metabolism, right? Number 1, glucose used for fuel, stored in a muscle, liver, and blood. So that's 4 things, right? 4 factors. Obviously, blood being blood sugar. Now, if you think about protein metabolism, protein is used for energy, and a little bit of protein is also stored in the blood. So that's 2. Now, if you think about fats, right? Fat is converted into fat. Yes, like I said, it can be used for energy over long term, but again, glucose preferred fuel source of energy. Now you're probably thinking, ketogenic diets, low carb diets, everyone's saying this, right? Well, yes, of course it works, but one thing you have to realize though is in these studies, most of it is on pathological people, so people that are obese, the average Joe, the average public Joe that probably doesn't even resistance train. So also keep this in mind, we try to seek out every little fiber of muscle gain. And finally, we got to number 2, which is carbs don't actually store as fat as regularly, right? Or as easily. Whereas fat literally is direct conversion to fat. Now, I'm not saying you can't get fat by just overeating carbs. Of course you can. If you're in a surplus of calories, you will still gain fat, right? But here's the thing. Even though fat and protein can be turned into energy, obviously via gluconeogenesis, here's the thing. It has to go through different processes, right? So obviously protein then gets converted into glucose. However, if you eat glucose, you get glucose. So by eating higher carbs, it's more efficient and a less costly process. And again, on ketogenic diets, yes, of course, we're gonna adapt to it. Of course, we're gonna use fat as fuel. If you're on a desert and you eat literally just, let's say, fats, of course, we're gonna use that energy or that fat as energy, right? So as a species, we adapt, we need to understand this. But the real question becomes, is it optimal for maximum muscle gain? And on that note, also remember that carbs, if you go to the supermarket, are a lot cheaper than a lot of protein and fat sources. And number 3 is training energy, right? Now, if you eat a lot of carbohydrates and you max them out, you eat like 500, 600 grams of carbs, obviously, depending on the weight of the individual, you're gonna make sure that you have that training fuel when you train. This is especially key when you're starting to overreach, when you're starting to hit the higher volumes, carbs will become way more important. Another point that I have to point out, similar to the ketogenic diets, is that the carb to fat ratio. Now, if you've been watching me for a long period of time, you know that I would say the carb to fat ratio, it doesn't really matter too much, right? But when you talk about maximizing muscle gain, maybe it kind of matters a little bit. And here's the thing, again, similar to probably ketogenic diets, probably more so in this kind of study in this region, is that again, it's on pathological people, obese people, the average Joe general public. And one thing we need to consider is that these people their insulin response is like almost non-existent compared to bodybuilders, right? Now, protein, eating more of it, it's not going to be much more beneficial if you're in a mass gaining phase, right? Maybe if you're in a calorie deficit, it might help a little bit more for muscle retention if you're having really low protein intake, which most people really don't. Anyway, besides the point, fat, eating more fat, I don't know what it's going to get used for. As long as you meet the minimum amounts, which I'll talk about later, for like, let's say, brain function, hormone function, you're good to go. Besides that, excessive fat, obviously if you're in a calorie surplus, it's just going to get stored as fat. And another point is basically getting a bigger pump. Now, there has been a lot of research in the literature, or speculation, that's the word I was looking for, is that basically the more pump you get, the more cell swelling you get, it leads to more muscle growth. Now again, like I said in a previous video about literally the number one factor to muscle growth of an external mechanical load to a joint will lead to, you know, more muscle growth. In my personal opinion, I don't think cell swelling maybe would be like a direct conversion, maybe a byproduct or something. That's just my hypothesis. But anyway, that's that. More pump, which to be honest with you, it just feels a lot better and you look a lot better. So more carbs means more pump, up to a point, of course. Another benefit of, let's say, high carb, low fat is again that you can kind of eat quite a lot, right? And for those people that really struggle eating a lot, this might not be the most beneficial way to go, because let's face it, if you're eating a high protein, high carb meal and low fat, low fiber, because that way you can actually digest it a lot quicker, right, than if you're having a mixed meal. Same as the glycemic index. Just because you're having a carb source, let's say white potato or bread, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to get digested faster, because you could be having this with, let's say, fats, high fiber and high protein. Well, that's going to completely change the glycemic index of a food as well. So anyway, just the high carb, high protein will let you clear the meal, so digest it a lot quicker, allowing you to eat more throughout the day, so more often as well, which for those especially hard gainers, it's going to be very hard once you reach the, let's say, high end of body fat percentage, because then you need more calories to gain more weight. And number 5, or at least I think it's number 5, is literally you get more anabolism from topping up your glycogen stores. So again, the more carbs you have, the higher glycogen stores are, obviously up to a point again, but it will probably promote muscle growth. And back on a second point is that having higher carbs or more carbs will also provide an anti-catabolic response, obviously if you're doing resistance training as well, which I'm sure you are if you're watching this, because like I said at the start of the video, the body's preferred source fuel is literally glucose, so it won't tap into any other thing really, because if that's in abundance, it'll use that first. Now another thing I should mention is that also consuming high carbs pre and probably post workout will be also a lot more beneficial, and just on the safe side. So what about lower carbs and higher fats on rest days? Well, kind of the same as refeeds. One refeed is not going to make a massive difference, at least on a physiological level, so cellularly, more probably psychologically. But anyway, that's beside the point. Adaptations really do take a long time to set in, so again, I wouldn't worry about that. Just consistently eat high carbohydrates, or if you do want to do lower fats, then do lower fats if that really helps you adhere to that diet. Now, how much fat should you be taking in to meet the minimum requirements? Probably around 1.0 to 0.5 of grams per kg, which I don't know really what that works out, grams per pound of body weight. But anyway, that's the measurement, right? Now, where am I getting these fats from? Now, you probably not even, or you probably shouldn't eat a lot of quote unquote direct fats, or like nuts or olives. You literally get all the fats you need, probably from the carbohydrates that you eat, and especially if you eat fattier protein sources. So let's say steak, a fattier source of steak, or mince. But even if you eat the lean meats, trust me, you will still probably get that fat. And you know, the oats, because let's face it, we all eat protein oats, and I caught you out there, didn't I? So anyway, that's that. Now, before we end this video, a limitation here, man, is that especially when you are on a high body fat percentage range, because obviously you need more calories now to gain weight, it will probably become really hard, because let's say you're eating like rice, potatoes, and you're probably getting so bored of eating kind of the same shit, right? Because it's just high protein, high carb, low fat, which means you have to eat a lot, very often, and it can be very psychologically draining, like another meal. One thing I also have to mention, how many times have I said that? is that when you're doing a high carb mass, right, so you're having loads of carbohydrates, high protein, very, very low fat. Here's the thing, the fat you're gonna take in, so especially if you're in a surplus of calories and let's say one day you take in a lot of fat, that fat is probably gonna be more readily stored as fat than irregularly would. So keep that in mind as well. So basically if you eat more fat, let's say one day or a few days, and you just go from 0 to 100, it'll probably get stored as fat more readily. So I think I'll drill that into your head. So anyway, that's the video. One thing I also have to mention, which I keep saying one thing, is that literally everything I've said here, man, is that this is no special diet, right? And I'm not here to bullshit you and market you that, oh, high carb mass is the special thing. And definitely is not anything really special at all. As long as you eat in a calorie surplus, get enough protein, you'll be good to go. But if you try to eke out every ounce of muscle, maybe, just maybe, this might be more beneficial. I mean, this is the first time I'm trying it, so my opinions on this might also adjust, like it does on most things. And again, on hard gainers, if you're still watching this, on hard gainers, if you're a hard gainer, I probably wouldn't recommend this for you. You need to get in more fattier sources of protein and just more fats in general, because that's probably an easier way to get more calories in throughout the day and obviously eat more throughout the day. So that's the high carb mass. If you enjoyed it, if you like to have science, fuck man, I can't speak. If you like to have science on a daily, me teaching you, subscribe to the channel down below. I don't know why I can't speak today, man. Stay positive, stay smiling. Let's get it. As always, I'll see you in the next one.